Does Max race Oscar differently than he races Lando?
Did I expect it to arrive in such style so quickly? Probably no, I didn't.
One of the problems with having an inverse strategy across drivers is they will meet at some point.
Couldn't get his helmet off, could he? And Max was trying to help him?
It's not a finishing school. It's Formula One.
It was actually Willy Wonka and Paul Atreides.
Hello all, welcome to the latest edition of the F1 show brought to you by Audi, in which we are going to review a very enjoyable and hectic Miami sprint weekend. It had a bit of everything, from Lego cars to Kimi Antonelli picking up a sprint pole to Max Verstappen taking pole with another amazing lap on Saturday evening before we got into the race itself, and McLaren in the end dominating to take a 1-2. I'm fresh off a plane from Philadelphia. I have a big vat of coffee alongside me. We've got Ted Kravitz standing by. He got in last night just in time for the put the kids to bed, didn't you, Ted? And Bernadette Collins, who was watching from back home on the sofa. Perhaps we should start with you, Bernie, and see what you made of the Miami Grand Prix not being there. Did we do enough to keep you entertained?
Yeah, I was wondering about your comment about being fresh off a plane, because I think you're probably not feeling that fresh, Simon. But yeah, I think watching at home, it was watching at home, it was interesting because it's quite late in the UK, and obviously you should never complain, because I was thinking of the people that are watching from Australia would have been very early on their Monday morning. It was sort of 9 p.m. here. I think the beauty of that is, despite the very early morning races we can watch much more of the build up, which is good, get a bit more feeling for what's going on. And then maybe I didn't watch so much of the post because it was quite late by the time that was all happening here. But yeah, it's quite enjoyable, I feel, to have it at one end of your day, and then you can sort of get into it when you're back home and on the sofa with a nice glass of wine.
Yeah. Or two. We've got a new minibus as well, Bernie. You'll be pleased to know.
Have we?
That was driven to and from the track by David Croft in a horrendous shirt in the morning.
I seen the shirt.
Avocados.
Yeah.
Not as bad as the flamingo one. And then Ted, I mean, we navigated well back home in the evening, but I think that could be here to stay, that minibus.
I liked it. It was fun. I mean, you know me, I'm a bit of a control freak anyway. And it was quite fun being critiqued by a Le Mans winner, an Indy 500 driver, and one of the finest racing drivers in the US. Who else was critiquing me? I mean, yourself, Simon. But when Anthony Davidson and Danica Patrick say, "Nice driving, son," then you're all right. One thing that I think Crofty needs to take a drive with Sir Jackie Stewart, because Jackie has this thing about braking. He says, when you brake, you need to brake, and then just before you come off come to a stop, just ease off the brake so you don't get the shuddering front. Crofty needs to hear that. So, because when he brakes, he just brakes and he keeps it on the brake pedal. So when you stop, it's like. But it was quite fun in our big minibus, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I mean, the thing is, he took one curb out, but instead of just talking all the way to the track, you think actually he's going to be concentrating on his driving, but he's not. He's singing. He's just singing. Playing his metal, singing and banging on the steering wheel. Yeah. So,
but that's true. But whereas I'm kind of barking instructions and critiquing other drivers. So if heaven imagine, Simon, that our team radio while driving would be recorded and then played out for the entire world, I think we can have some sympathy with Lewis this weekend.
We can.
I wouldn't want my driving radio to have been played. There have been beeps all over the place.
We'll come back to you, Ted. That's what we would be telling you over team radio. Just pause there if you could. Right, let's get into it. I'm going to ask for a winner of the weekend, a loser of the weekend, and your moment of the weekend. Bernie, if you can be as brief or as elongated as you like on this one, but who's your winner of the weekend?
I think some of them are going to be pretty standard. I think Piastri's winner of the weekend. I think he came out of it really strongly. I think my loser of the weekend it's a bit harsh to say loser, but Kimi Antonelli had a really rough weekend, given the real shine, the real bright qualifying that he had, particularly for the sprint. And then my moment is, well, can I choose 2 moments because I'm selfish? Kimi's pole was amazing. I really enjoyed seeing Kimi do that, and the Lego cars. So at home, I could only imagine the fun that was being had in the track and the Lego cars. And I felt very guilty. You did that beautiful feature on how they were built. When you see the time that goes into building them, and then the guys are just destroying them around the track. That is what happens every weekend on an F1 track, isn't it? They don't think of the hours that's gone into building it.
Don't worry about that, Bernie. I know, having met and spent the guy with those guys in Prague, in the guys and girls in Prague in the Czech Republic, they could not have been happier. I was imagining them come into work on Monday morning saying, did you see they actually went together? They crashed them. They would have loved it. They would have absolutely loved it. The people who built it in Prague, having visited them and got to know them a little bit in February. I'm going to flip that, Bernie, on you. I'm going to say that Kimi Antonelli was one of the winners because he made a breakthrough. And people have been saying, okay, all good, Kimi, but where's the speed you've been promising? And he was like, there is my speed in a pole position. And I think that was a bit of a breakthrough. Yes, I know what you mean. He, lost out eventually and got a bit of manners put on him on the sprint race, and then maybe didn't work out for him in the Grand Prix quite so much. But I think Kimi was one of the winners. Obviously, Lando was a winner. Obviously, Oscar was a winner. And I'm going to say Lando was a winner as well, because despite all of it, he had a better weekend than he has done recently and showed he's made progress. He said this on the team radio afterwards. He said, I think, never mind, Will, we didn't win the Grand Prix. We did win the sprint race, but we've made progress this weekend on where he was a bit lost with the car the last couple of races in the Middle East. And my loser of the weekend is any photographer, Simon, who failed to realize that the master of disguise, Timothée Chalamet, was actually not a V-carb, a Racing Bulls mechanic, but Timothée Chalamet, when he came into he was just in disguise. Did you know this? So he walks in, Bernie, let me tell you, he walks into the paddock and he's dressed in a Toro Rosso shirt, not the pink one, but the usual Racing Bulls shirt, and some blue trousers. And because, he's the Fremen, he's Paul Atreides, he's Willy Wonka, he's Bob Dylan, he's a master of disguise. No one can tell that he's not actually a Racing Bulls mechanic, because he looked like a Racing Bulls mechanic or engineer. And all the photographers, so many photographers missed him. And they were like, is Timothée Chalamet here? Because he didn't sneakily, Simon, did he? He didn't appear on the official celebrities list of celebrities that gets passed around. And so had he done...
the Chalamaniacs, isn't that what it is?
Exactly, the Chalamaniacs. Exactly. Had he done, everyone would have been, oh my word, Timothée Chalamet is here. So sneaky by the Chalamets and the people who put together the celebs. But the loser of the week for me was any photographer who didn't realize that wasn't a Toro Rosso mechanic or an engineer late for work wearing a Racing Bulls thing. It was actually Willy Wonka and Paul Atreides.
Yeah, well, Kimi, I think he was. I'm flipping it as well. Sorry, Bernie, but it was just the look on his face. I've got a 9-month-old spaniel, and he reminds me of that when he came bounding out of it. Couldn't get his helmet off, could he? And Max
that was funny. That was funny.
To help him. So he did all that, and then his dad. We had to interview his dad. It's always nice, and you forget these moments, or when they're there, they're gone, and you think, oh. When it happened with Lando last year, that was such a lovely, lovely moment when he picked up his first win. And they're easily forgotten, but actually they're seminal moments in drivers' careers. And I felt that was huge. And his father, Marco, was obviously, over the moon. It was. I thought it was quite telling as well, actually, with that, when Toto came straight in and went, okay, enough's enough, stop high-fiving in here, we've got work to do. It was almost, okay, you're the dad. I need to just park you over there for a moment if I could, so that we can get back to the real business of getting ready for the sprint and towards qualifying. Loser, I mean, we're going to come on to it, and it's a harsh word. Maybe we just say we're going to have to change this criteria going forward. For a tough weekend for Jack Doohan, we are going to come on to that. I hope it's not the last time we kind of see, it's just, it would be a shame, wouldn't it, really, if he's to depart from Alpine after just 6 races. And the moment of the weekend was, as I said, Crofty and Kravitz taking us to and fro. Yeah,
I've thought of a moment. I've thought of my moment. My moment was have a tea break while you're at it.
Yeah, that is good. I mean, that's seminal team radio as well, isn't it?
Have a tea break while you're at it. Every time. I just...
Yeah, that will go down in the annals of history. Or why don't you let Carlos Sainz through whilst you're at it too? He was on fire. He was on fire on the radio. Shall we bring in our special guest this week? It's the governor. We might as well. I think he's gone to make himself a cup of coffee, but there he is. For the first time on the new podcast.
Hello, Martin.
It's Martin Brundle, everybody. Hi, Martin.
Morning. Good afternoon, actually. It is now already.
How are you? Full of the joys of spring after that? When do you get back from Miami?
Yesterday afternoon, actually. Yeah, it was. I really enjoyed it. Actually, I thought it was a good race. It probably, to really spice it up, it needed the rain or a proper safety car rather than a virtual safety car. Then I think it would have been an absolute barnstorm. But the wheel-to-wheel action we had with Piastri and Verstappen, Lando coming through, a couple of sweet overtakes on the Mercedes, and then Lando versus Max sort of in combat, and all the other stuff that was going on. And then, the more I think about it, do you remember Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc coming through side by side through the last few corners, and Lewis nearly getting past a pair of them? I mean, yeah, it was wall-to-wall action thinking about it. And, young Piastri, well, he's won 4 of the last 6, hasn't he? And it's just looking like absolute world championship material.
Be honest with us, and I know you will. You're never not honest. But did you see this coming from Oscar Piastri at the end of last year? Could you have called this one? I mean, when we were getting predictions for the year, I think it was only Karun who, as we talked about, Bernie, has flip-flopped back and forth between Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri as many times as we've had hot dinners. But did you see it coming from a while back?
I think his rate of improvement has been pretty mighty, and he picks things up really quickly. And towards the end of last year, I think we saw this kind of potential. Did I expect it to arrive in such style so quickly? Probably no, I didn't, frankly, because he's just winning, and he looks so confident about it, and he's so unflustered about anything and everything apart from that. What was it, a giddy or whatever he did? He tried badly to do at the end, that little jig, that little dance that he was embarrassed about. I don't know what it was quite, but it was a nice touch. So he's just got it there. I think his racecraft is a touch stronger than Lando's. I think absolute pace on the weekend, you'd have to say Lando was faster. If he was homing in the sprint, and then Lando got a little bit lucky with the safety car and won it, and he was catching again, and Oscar was honest enough to admit it wasn't his, I think he just said, wasn't my finest second half of a race. So Lando, I thought, had the edge on pace, but Oscar got it all the rest of it all put together.
I mean, at the moment, Oscar's just sort of having a great time, and Lando is in some sort of recovery form. And then on that basis is what I say, Martin, was that Lando was having a good weekend because he made progress from what's been a dodgy couple of races. But the way, for me, what was instructive, if you're going to be world champion this year, you've got to beat Max Verstappen, okay? Even if he doesn't have the best car. And the way, for me, was the way that Oscar raced and passed Verstappen seemed a little less frenetic, maybe is the word, than Lando. A little more sure in the end. They took about the same amount of time to pass Max, although Lando did, of course, have to go off track and then give the place back, and Oscar kept on track at all the time. But I've got a real doozy of a question for you, Martin. Does Max race Oscar differently than he races Lando?
100%. Yes.
In what way?
Unquestionably.
In what way?
I think he knows. He knows that there's something a bit more Street Fighter about Oscar Piastri, and he saw it in Jeddah. I think Max knows he's got a different animal when Oscar's in his mirrors, not by much than Lando, just positioning of the car. There's a decisiveness about what he did that. But you can't criticize Lando's racecraft, because the way he passed the Mercedes and eventually passed Max was just top draw, in particular. But somehow, I have absolutely no doubt that, and just words he says as well, that Max realizes Oscar's a different deal in wheel-to-wheel combat.
I think the big thing is, when you look at the last few races, the turn ones have really stood out. Piastri arguably lost out a lot this week in turn one, lost several positions. And then Piastri seems very sure, if you want it for a better word, of the line he's going to take, where he's going to position the car, how he's going to try and stand his ground through turn one. And that must be very interesting as a driver on the grid, looking down into turn one with the people that you have around you, Martin, in terms of how much you're going to give or push in that. I can't even imagine being in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, for example, Piastri's overtake on Verstappen was set up for several corners, wasn't it? He worked it out over the laps. He followed him, and then it was lap 14 when he eventually got past. And he basically ended up forcing Max. And Max had even been told by GP Lambiese's engineer, stay to the inside. Max did that. And then Oscar, just dollied him up a treat. Max is tight into turn one on the dirty line, has to brake late. Oscar saw it all unfolding, actually had to turn left a little bit. He realized that Max was going to slide and was going to brake. And that's sort of driving somebody else's car at the same time as driving your own car. That's what we're talking about here. He just had a little jink left, ducked underneath and disappeared. And that was all one big cunning plan that came to fruition nicely.
I mean, to me, just to add to that, it's a split-second decision, isn't it? But also perhaps being unluckily in the wrong place on the outside at turn two on that first lap. But then the time that it took to clear him comparatively, yes, it was relatively same in terms of laps, but he did lose 6 or 7 seconds, didn't he, in trying to get past Max as opposed to Oscar, Martin. And I wonder, going forward, for Lando himself, we talk about the racecraft, and you said it's fine the way his racecraft's fine in passing slower cars, but when it comes down to it in wheel-to-wheel combat, if that's to happen more often with himself and Piastri and Max going forward to the end of the season, do you think it's going to be a case this year of Oscar just having the edge on racecraft and wheel-to-wheel combat, and Lando just being slightly quicker? And if Lando can get his head right, maybe that can take care of it. But what advice would you give to Lando about changing that or catching Oscar up on that front?
I think it's too early to critique anybody, really. And what I do know from history is that when drivers are up for a world championship, they step their game up. They find an overdrive gear. We've seen it over the years, over the decades, when they just take off and they just improve every aspect of what they're doing. And, I don't, Lando in the main race, I mean, Max has gone into the first corner, locked the front axle, starting to run wide. Lando's tucked underneath him, tracks, clear ahead of him, packs on his tail, and he hit the throttle. And because it looked, if he had gone steaming around the outside of turn two, it looked genius for Lando. And then Max had a slide. Max's problems in turns 1 and 2 cost Lando the Grand Prix, as far as I'm concerned. So, but you can't say Lando should have done anything other than hit the throttle to go. I mean, it looked like an overtaking opportunity. But I think they will both address all and every, any issues that they have where they need to improve, and just they'll both raise their gains. But there's just something in the way, Lando's not quite as decisive how he places the car when he's overtaking, I don't think. And he'll learn from that. But, the way he went past, was it George, was extraordinary, actually, a really unorthodox overtaking place. But to answer your question, yes, I think that's exactly where they are, but I wouldn't say that's going to stay like that for the rest of the season.
Let's not forget, of course, guys, that it wasn't the perfect Saturday for Oscar. I only realised this really when Oscar was talking about the silly dance, the griddy, and he was saying he wasn't expecting to do it, hadn't practiced it, because having made that mistake, which I think I said on Saturday's notebook, was the first in qualifying. That was the first big, I can see that's a mistake from Oscar since the Australia off and the slow reverse, wasn't it? I think that mistake of Oscar's in qualifying, I can't think of a mistake he's made since then. So that only being fourth was a mistake, and he recovered. He didn't expect to win the Grand Prix, did he, Bernie? I mean, after that, he said I wasn't expecting from fourth to win the Grand Prix, so I hadn't practiced the dance. But what a recovery.
Well, maybe he's practicing the dance this week. Maybe we should all have a go at practicing this week. But I think that, yes, he did make a mistake in qualifying, and that did lead him to the position he was in the track or on the grid, and therefore where he thought he was going to finish the race. But that's unusual from Oscar, because I think if anything over the races we've had so far, it's been Lando making these little mistakes in qualifying, not getting the lap together, not quite getting the McLaren the position on the grid it should be. And back to sort of Simon's point a minute ago about if one's a bit better in absolute pace, one's a bit better in racecraft, what's going to make the difference? And I think being ahead, we've seen how important qualifying is on a lot of tracks so far this year, and whoever can tidy up those little things. Yes, it was Oscar this week, but there's been quite a few weeks where it's been Lando. Tidy up, get the best out of the car, be ahead of Max Verstappen, not have to do the overtakes. That's going to be crucial as the year goes on and cars find their performance through it.
Should we bring in a couple of McLaren questions from the fans that have been writing in? Thanks very much, by the way. If you want to keep sending your questions our way, we'll try and get through them as best we can. Akan Shakan 1235, I think that's what it says. How the McLaren boys now going to pretend that their car isn't a rocket ship, being as they were over 30 seconds beyond the nearest driver, that being George Russell. We'll come on to that. And Bryce says, is it time for McLaren to name Piastri as number one? Looks like we're heading for Mercedes 2016 2.0. So there's a few in there that perhaps we want to handle. I mean, obviously, we're only a quarter of the way through the season, Martin, and there are only 16 points, isn't it? And then a further 16 down to Max Verstappen. So too early to say that, isn't it? But we are, it would seem, was this the weekend on the other topic that we feel that it is now going to clearly be a McLaren intra-team battle for the title? Is it too early to say on that front as well?
Yeah, much too early. There's so many points available. We've got 18 races and 4 sprints yet. And the sprint points are going to be much more important this year than they have been in the past in terms of the championship. They're going to be crucial to keep getting those in, especially with no point for fastest lap, which I still don't understand why they took that away. It's nonsense. But the problem McLaren are going to have is if Verstappen and George Russell keep pumping in the results, and Mercedes have got an update coming in Imola they're quite excited about, but I'm sure they'll all improve to an extent. But if they're there, there's no doubt in my mind that Piastri and Norris will take points off each other. So they've got to be careful. They don't, they're so focused on each other that somebody else comes in and wins the championship, as Alain Prost did in 1986, was it? Or something? Snuck in. But the problem you've got is then if you wait until somebody's mathematically out of the world championship, that's going to be October, November time, isn't it, in this championship? So McLaren might have to take a decision before that to make a choice. It depends how it unfolds, but they won't be thinking about that until the summer break at least.
Ted?
I mean, I'm just wondering how much, yes, you refer to the 33 seconds to 30. So the 33 seconds from the slowest McLaren, or the second McLaren to the fastest third, which was George, bearing in mind that Max had the bad luck with the virtual safety car. But yeah, I mean, let's see how the hot races. And Imola's not looking like it's going to be a particularly hot race, but let's see how the hot races benefit McLaren and their next to no tyre degradation through hot races. That's got all the other teams scratching their heads, how McLaren keep their tyres together so well and cool and everything. There was some story that Red Bull were pointing thermal infrared cameras at the McLaren's tyres. I did have a good scope out because it's nothing new. Ferrari one of Ruth Buscombe's first jobs was to stand on the Paddock Club back gantry and spy on other cars with a heat camera that she'll tell you when she joined Ferrari first job. So that was quite interesting. So there's nothing new in trying to spy on other people's hot tyres, but I didn't see any sort of cameras that Red Bull had set up around the McLaren garage. I'm sure they have very quickly been taken down, but something you can measure. But let's see how they do it and whether they do it in hot races to come. Spain will be the other decision-making point, won't it? Spain will be the other point where we see whether any of the new technical directives, but McLaren insist that the car they have now and the wings they have now are Spain compliant. Yeah. So maybe it won't make much of a difference.
Yeah, good gag that actually from Zach, wasn't it? Taking the water bottle full of tyre water out onto the pit wall. He knew what was being levelled at them. But as far as we're aware, they've looked into this, and they see nothing untoward with regards to doing anything to cool the brakes and the brake ducts.
Well, yeah, but is that still being? I thought the timing of that was odd, Simon. The whole tyre water thing, because that was a story towards the end of last year, wasn't it?
You've been reading that they've been using these infrared guns to have a quick look at it, and Red Bull are convinced that they can't be cooling them to that degree with air alone. Anyone want to shed any light on that? Is this anything, or is this stirring a pot?
All I know is that I spent all my career hoping that we didn't have any condensation in the tyres, because you just lose control of the tyre pressure at that point by putting water in the it makes no sense. It would just turn into steam instantly anyway. Pressures would be career out of control, and it was amazing because the car can sweat sometimes, and you go on, and then you put them up to 100 plus on the track. But we know that the bottle idea was Zach's idea because tyre was spelt with an I instead of a Y, wasn't it? But I think Christian Horner keeps taking pot shots at him, and I think that was his way of quietly sending a broadside back. But McLaren have, with their geometry, with their cooling, whatever they're doing, they're keeping their tyres intact better than anybody else. But inevitably in Formula One, that immediately creates a cheat, cry, doesn't it? Because that's just how we rock and roll.
I was just going to say, I totally agree with Martin. If people understood the lengths that teams go to get moisture out of the tyres, this story would be, it's quite funny actually. But I think there's hundreds of ways to cool tyres, cool brakes. If you run the brakes at a slightly different temperature, the tyre instantly runs at a slightly different temperature. If you run a slightly different contact patch, the tyre runs at a different temperature. There's hundreds of methods of doing it. It'll not be straightforward. It's a whole package. And one of the things, like we've seen this week, McLaren having this advantage in the conditions that we had in Miami, if they have a slightly hotter race and they can run half a second off every lap. I think that's an extreme number. But if they can run a few tenths off every lap, then you're managing your tyres a lot better. So there's a whole host of things that go together to get this solution. And teams will try and find out what they can from others through thermal cameras and these things, but there's so much monitoring now done from Pirelli in terms of before the tyre goes on the car, when it's on the car, and then when it comes off the car, that it's very difficult to get around the regulation of what temperature the tyre leaves the garage at and what pressure it goes out at. So it's something to do with their brakes and their cooling ducts around that are keeping those tyres in a more usable condition for longer.
There we go. Hopefully that puts pay to that for the moment, but no doubt it won't. And the pot shots will keep going because that McLaren is a rocket ship. Can we also let's move on to Ferrari before we take a quick break. And obviously what happened on the pit wall, we touched on it at the top there, Martin, with regards to sarcastic Lewis. He had some absolute belters for us over team radio. But it struck us when we were watching it, and what are they doing? It was one of those where you think, come on, Ferrari, he's on the faster tyre, and there are some excuses for Fred Vasseur later on. But Lewis was on the mediums, and ahead of them was Kimi Antonelli on the hards. Was it not just a straight decision? Rather, we'll come back to you. It's just, let's get it done and give him the opportunity.
Yeah, on the face of it, it looked like a no-brainer because Lewis caught them like a rocket ship, didn't he, on those tyres? What was a bit, what was confusing the matter is that as soon as one Ferrari got in the other's DRS, it looked like the faster Ferrari. And so that were, and it's, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but as when Lewis got in front, he didn't pull away. In fact, then Charles started catching him back up. The radio calls, they seem to sort of hesitate too much. They have them for a long time, haven't they? Some of the things Lewis has said on the radio is quite sarcastic, as he said. You can't unsay those, and I think it's quite telling, that kind of frustration. It's a bit unfair that we play selected radio messages out on the TV in a way, but it's such an important part, especially now the drivers are buried inside the car as they are and you can barely see them. It's such a window for us to understand just what's going on inside the cockpit, those radio calls. And, I think it's quite telling just the sort of the sarcasm of them and how upset Lewis is. And, he'd have been really frustrated in that race. 23 laps behind Ocon in a customer Ferrari with 300 people in the factory, trying to get past Ocon's Haas. That's not where Lewis expected to be this year. So I'd imagine his mood wasn't too good. And it did look like they should have just swept him straight past Charles because they were on, one started on hard and went to medium. Charles started on medium and went to hard. They were going to meet in the middle somewhere. So it seemed a bit of a no-brainer. But in the end, they had to let Charles back through. And that's when Lewis came up with his second comment of, do you want me to let the Williams through as well? Which was painful listening. They closed ranks at the end, didn't they, Ted, when you were talking to them and to sort of calm that all down. But as I said, some of those things Lewis it came out with, you can't unsay.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long history of, I think back to Alain Prost and even, I don't remember Michael Schumacher ever criticizing Ferrari, but Sebastian Vettel certainly did, and Kimi Räikkönen did. It's just that people didn't think he was serious, but he was, deadly serious. The long history of Ferrari drivers criticizing Ferrari and it not working out well for him. But I want to ask you, Martin and Bernie and Simon, what you think. I think there are three scenarios that make Lewis Hamilton more happy to be a bit more sort of sarcastic and sassy on the radio. And, all right, listen, I mean, I thought when I interviewed Fred Vasseur, I was kind of thinking of saying to him, Fred, are you aware of the internet meme about "we'll get back to you"? It's the first time that Lewis was on the end, potentially the wrong end, of the famous Ferrari strategy, "we'll get back to you." Wasn't it? That has amused us and infuriated the likes of Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc before. Charles Leclerc particularly.
Words of wisdom, doesn't Charles?
Words of wisdom. That's right. So first scenario is that why Lewis feels happy to do that. First scenario is that he feels more secure and more happy in the team, and everything is going well, and he's confident enough to say those things without feeling like there's going to be any comeback on him. Scenario two is that maybe he's not happy with what's going on and wants to help reform the team, and that he wants to help Ravin Jain, the head of strategy, be a bit sharper and interact with his engineer. And the third scenario is that maybe Lewis doesn't care anymore, isn't happy, and is just happy to criticize them, which I don't think is the case. But you might say that might be a reason. What do you think? Anyone pick up?
So a couple of things to say. Two words that kind of caught my attention in Lewis's transmission. You guys, because he's a massive team player, and in one of them, like where he said, "You guys," I can't, whatever it was about not letting him past Leclerc, which was quite a punchy thing to say, as in it's not us, it's you. And a question for you, Ted. Do you remember him saying anything like that at McLaren or Mercedes? And do you think he would? Is this new territory?
I think that's because the strategy department is so compartmentalized at Ferrari than the race engineers. More compartmentalized. You've got Ravin Jain, you've got his strategy department, and both Brian Botzi and Riccardo Adami have to default. They don't have any autonomy on strategy at all. Whereas I think the likes of Will Joseph, Tom Stallard, they're always discussing it. They've always got these ideas, are much more integrated. And the other thing is, why on earth, if they knew that there's a possibility of Lewis starting on the hards and then going to the mediums, they should have seen this in a meeting on the Sunday morning saying, look, Charles, there's going to be a chance that Lewis is on the medium and he might have to come past you. Why on earth that wasn't talked about? But so I think it's more separated, Martin. I think that's why he said, you guys, you strategy guys in your little bunker there, which takes 10 minutes for anyone to get anything to get through to you. Hurry up, get on it. With Mercedes, James Vowles or latterly Rosie Tate is right there. They're right with them. At McLaren, they're right with them. You guys are taking too long.
I think the thing for me is we've heard lots of radio comms in the past of Lewis being critical of the team. We've heard a lot of my tyres are dead, I can't make it to the end, all of this sort of thing at times in various races, feedback from him. But I sort of agree with what you just said there, Ted. One of the problems with having an inverse strategy across drivers is they will meet at some point. Now, Mercedes were on the same type of thing. One driver starting on the hard, one driver starting on the medium. In that final stint of the race, because of the safety car, they've both stopped on the same lap. That wasn't the plan. Obviously, the plan was that Lewis on a hard tyre went longer on the hard tyre, but they both stopped on the same lap. So now you're faced with both drivers together on track on different tyres, and the guy behind, Lewis, is on a medium, which is faster initially, but not faster over the stint. So the medium tyre over the 20 laps that were left in the race will not have been as quick over the whole stint as the hard. And that's where the hesitation comes to switch the drivers, because what happens is you switch them at the beginning, Lewis is ahead on a fast, then you have to switch them back. So you switch them twice and all you do is lose time as a team. But yes, it should have been discussed in advance. A bit unfortunate how it ended up in that position. Mercedes, George, who'd extended further, got the safety car, so they were well split up on track. They didn't have the same problem coming. I think Martin said it as well, whichever driver's behind always looks quicker because he's getting DRS. So the driver behind always feels like he's the power to go faster than the driver ahead, and it is only a way to upset both drivers. So I sort of can understand the position that Ferrari are in and saying, okay, we think Lewis is going to be faster for the first 10 laps, but then we think Charles is going to be faster, and we don't want to have to switch them twice. But what happened in this situation, possibly because it wasn't discussed enough in the pre-meeting, is both drivers probably will come away feeling really unhappy, and both of them felt like something better could have been done from their side of the garage. And that over time ebbs away at the strategy of the race, if you like.
I mean, in a way, that might all just be a storm in a teacup, because their real issue is in a 57-lap race, they finish 57 seconds behind. That's what they've really got to be talking about this week, and all the it is. And as Lewis said, I've got fire in my belly. I'm going to let you know when I'm not. And when he got out of the car, and he didn't feel the need to apologise, and why should he? But he was like, oh, "Come on, I'm a competitive animal. We got to do better than this," and that is as a team. But a second a lap off the pace, and we know how mighty the McLarens were. They were just war. We saw them, unfiltered, just how quick a McLaren is on a hot track that torches the tyres a little bit. When the gloves were off because Norris was catching Piastri, and they let them go, and literally they were a second a lap faster than the entire field for quite a long time there. So that's the real issue for Ferrari, not a little bit of discomfort over the radio.
No, just to add to that, I suppose if you could look for a couple of crumbs of comfort for them, they did make a decent call, didn't they, in the sprint, coming in early with Lewis, which got him up to third on that front. And when you look at them compared to other years, operationally in the pit stops, they're the quickest crew at the moment. That's belonged to Red Bull, and look at what happened to them this weekend. That was the area that I know we talked about it, and I know that you got a little bit of payback, didn't you, from someone in Red Bull for criticising the pit stop crews there. But Jonathan Wheatley, I can imagine, will be looking on, smiling from on high in Sauber at what's going on down there and what happened. I mean, look, it could have been nasty, couldn't it, that unsafe release for Max into Kimi in the sprint, but a good bit of driving from Kimi probably saved a few injured mechanics. I suppose on the subject of Ferrari, though, all of you, a couple of questions in, and you just know that ultimately they are, as you said, not where they want to be. A minute off the winning car in the Miami Grand Prix is not, I mean, they thought they were going to be challenging. That's why they signed Lewis, and you can understand the frustrations because they're nowhere near it. So Speedy 316 UK, is Lewis regretting his decision to move to Ferrari yet? Anna 9909, Lewis, do you wish that you'd stayed at Mercedes? A couple of questions on that one. And actually, from Fred Vasseur's point of view, the CEO was there this weekend. The pressure has got to be ramping up exponentially now, has it? Or did they think, okay, it's the end of a set of regulations. Actually, we're all thinking about 2026, Martin. Come back to you on that one. But it doesn't take long before the politics of Ferrari takes over. And do you think that there will be some serious repercussions about how poor a start really they've had, with the exception of the China sprint, that they've had to the season?
Yes, of course, they're going to be super unhappy at Ferrari. They expected to be contenders for the championship, I'm sure, especially with a lineup like Leclerc and Hamilton. What they mustn't do is do like a football team and just fire the manager and fire everybody and change for the sake of change. That won't improve anything at all. And we have seen teams make that mistake. But it is, they were behind a Williams. They were behind Mercedes. They were behind Red Bull. They were behind McLaren. They were fifth fastest team, if you look at it like that. And that's really a big issue. They've got to understand that. And they clearly, if they could change the car, they would, if they knew what to do with it. So although we saw last year with Ferrari, they knew they had a problem. It took them several races with all the racing that's going on and cost cap and what have you to sort it out. But there'll be some heavy conversations at Ferrari. There has to be. One Williams was ahead of the pair of them, and the other was snapping at the heels. And Carlos Sainz got really unlucky with the virtual safety car, didn't he? Otherwise, he might have been ahead of the pair of them.
Yeah. Hey, what's happened since China then?
That's the point. Lewis said on Thursday, look, when as I referred to, he's being a bit more open about exactly what their problems are, but still nobody in Ferrari is being specific about what their particular problem with the car is. So the things that have changed, let's go back a little bit. They've got Loic Serra in this year, and together with their engineers, they decided to go with a pull rod front suspension, didn't they? And this is the Ferrari. The Ferrari finished second in the constructors. This is the last year. This is the Ferrari that was chasing down Lando at a later rate of knots at Abu Dhabi, wasn't he? It was a good car. It was a good car at the end of 2024. And why have they gone backwards? Okay, the front pull rod suspension is different, but they said that we've got more headroom to improve. So I don't think it's that. China was competitive, but because of the double disqualifications on car weight, which I think is explainable, but plank wear, which is probably more to the point, they've had to raise the car. And something Lewis referred to China. He said, we've not been competitive since China. Is that just because they raised the car because they can't run it low because they'll get disqualified and they're so terrified of that double disqualification, which was so embarrassing for them? Or is there something else going on? But Fred Vasseur, I think at the moment he's safe from Benedetto Vigna's knife, if you like. The Ferrari CEO is more measured. Vigneault is a more measured manager than maybe some have been in the past at Ferrari. I mean, I'm sure he's ambitious as anybody. I'm sure Benedetto Vigneault would love to run the Gestione Sportiva, the sporting side of Ferrari, but he's busy at the moment running the whole company. And you be a tougher man to get rid of a tough man, the toughest man, Fred Vasseur, than perhaps some of his predecessors. So what's happened since China? Is it just raising the car? And when can they lower that car again and get it to within its sweet spot?
Upgrades for Imola.
Yeah.
That's what they'll be looking to. Bernie?
Yeah, I think, that's important. I think the big question for all of these teams, and it's going to be really interesting for us to see it progress through the year, is when do they stop working on this year's car? Solving this problem, whatever it is for Ferrari, is going to be important for this year. And, to pick up on what Martin and you said earlier, there was some comments from Lewis over the weekend about, how good it was to see Kimi Antonelli on pole, how good it was to see Kimi Antonelli in the sprint in the pole. But that's got to hurt, isn't it? That's like seeing your ex, having a much better new other half, There's got to be, as much as Lewis is saying all the right things, it's got a little bit of the inside he has got to feel that in sprint qualifying. And next week's an important race for them in Imola, isn't it? The Italian home crowd. I'm really interested to see how many Lewis fans turn up, because I think there's been a lot of excitement around that. But it's got to hurt a wee bit at the minute, and maybe some of that's coming through.
Particularly with what we're hearing about what might be on who might be ahead for 2026. Obviously, it's sort of rumours and hearsay at the moment. But I think on the evidence of the last 15 years, you'd probably back Mercedes in a rule change over Ferrari. And no disrespect to Ferrari, they've been great in the past, but that greatness has not been for a number of years, has it? Since Kimi Räikkönen, 2007, 2008, etc., etc. So, right, time for us to take a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss Max's weekend, the new father, of course, the rookies, some faring better than others, and a few more questions from you. So stay with us. Quick word on our show partner, Audi. The philosophy of Audi Sport isn't just about winning races. It's about pushing boundaries. Everything learnt on the track goes straight into Audi's road cars, making them just as thrilling as they are refined. Take the Audi RS range. Serious performance, but with a level of sophistication and refinement that doesn't need to be loud to make a statement. It's that perfect blend of power and precision wrapped in quiet luxury. Whether it's their powerful style or the RS Sport suspension with Quattro all-wheel drive for razor-sharp handling, Audi is constantly redefining the future of performance. Book a test drive today to experience the Audi RS range for yourself. Welcome back to the F1 show, sponsored by Audi. Lucky to have Martin Brundle with myself, Bernie and Ted this week. So, Martin, let's get into it. And Max Verstappen's weekend, obviously another unbelievable pole position. I think the thing you can say about him this year is that the tiniest mistake, and I think Lando made one Oscar made one in turn 1, Lando made one in turn 17 in qualifying, and he jumped on that, and it was nigh on perfect lap, as we saw in Suzuka from Max. But ultimately, the pace wasn't there on the Sunday, and he finished a whopping, 39 seconds behind Oscar Piastri. So there's problems, but he's not being as openly critical as we've seen in the past. Obviously, congratulations to him on the birth of his daughter, Lily. Had that in the back of his mind all weekend. But where do you stand on Max and his position? He just seems to be very pragmatic. This is the best I can do with the car at the moment, but that car is not good enough, obviously, to challenge the McLarens.
Yeah, it seems to be the same story, doesn't it? Friday, this car won't turn, won't brake, it's got no grip. They work. And then he pulls the magic out in qualifying and sticks it on pole, just to remind everybody how good he is. And there are very few people in the Formula One paddock that would argue with you that anything other than that he's the best out there at the moment. He's extraordinary. He's got it all together. But his car's not, if you took Max out of the Red Bull at the moment, where do you think they are? Are they fourth or fifth fastest? Probably, if you took Max out of that equation. I mean, it's a punchy thing to say, but he's driving beautifully, and I don't think having a child will make any difference whatsoever. We're a pretty selfish bunch, racing drivers, and your focus, got your blinkers on in the car. And, you know, I had kids when I was in two wonderful children in Charlie and Alex. And you almost, you know, ticking a box where you think, yeah, okay, if the worst happens, there's there's lineage there, sort of thing. It's not going to slow you down. And it certainly hasn't slowed him down. But, you know, he can only pick the car up and carry it so long. And when the tyres go off, he then, as soon as he got passed by Oscar, he was moaning about the balance and the grip and what have you. And I think that was sheer frustration on his part. And that's just the way it is. He can deliver the magic. And, you know, the McLaren clearly isn't quite there on a single lap. Both drivers make a lot of mistakes, small, tiny mistakes, but the car's a bit flighty on low fuel. And then it's brilliant on the longer runs. And those two things are probably, well, almost certainly linked, I would say. But Max is in there just getting the job done. When was I'm trying to think at the weekend, when was the last time, other than in combat, we saw Max make a mistake and crash? And I think it might be that Hungarian Grand Prix when he was going to the grid and it started to rain.
Yeah.
Sorry?
In COVID, wasn't it?
Ted, maybe you can remember something, but I can't think of the last time Max actually threw it in the wall. I remember saying something he was walking out of a gravel trap a year or two ago, and I remember saying in commentary, God, that's so unusual, actually see Max having made an error. He's extraordinarily consistent and with his feet.
I mean, there was a qualifying session where he said, I bleeped it, didn't he? He said I think he made a mistake. That was his one radio message to GP. But he doesn't. No, I mean, he's ferociously competitive. And yeah, you're right, Simon. It was, you know, the Verstappen was 39.9 seconds, almost 40 seconds off Piastri at the end.
You could take 10 off that.
Yeah,
because he didn't
the
get
timing of the safety
the VSC cheap pit stop.
But they're still so competitive in that protest as well. And I saw this happening. So as I was waiting for Christian Horner off the pit wall, first thing he did was go and look at the race trace, and they were enlarging Russell's race trace. And Bernie, you can pick up on how they would have been able to see that his net speed over that yellow flag section wouldn't have been much slower, or as slower maybe as it should have been. And that's what prompted them. And he was in a real hurry, Christian. Did we play out the interview with Christian after the race, Simon, when you could see
I remember hearing from him.
He was edging to go, well, I did it. So maybe they didn't play it out because he was so keen to get away. I was always walking with him towards the edge of the garage as he was sort of saying, you know, what had happened. And as it turned out, having just looked at the race trace, he was going with Stephen Knowles, who is the second-headed replacement of Jonathan Wheatley as the rules guy, with Rich Wolverson as pit crew. Stephen Knowles is the rules man. He was going with him to type up the protest, try and get Russell a penalty, which they already had in mind when they told Max to stay within 5 seconds of him, which I just like. I just like the competitiveness. They're still competitive. Max is still competitive, and he'll stay in the championship, won't he?
I think the thing for me is Max's driving is obviously very impressive, and the lack of mistakes is equally as impressive. But whenever you see him pick up on these little things from other drivers, whether they've missed a yellow flag, whether they've cut the corner, whether, you know, all these things that he's picking up that are extra to his normal race and extra to the lap he's doing, that really sets him apart. And you listen to his radio comms, he's doing the strategy for himself and some other drivers around. He's fully on it. And that's someone who's driving so within his capacity. It's really difficult to comprehend all of the information he's taken in, and then fit to still come out with quite intelligent answers. He missed out on the VSC, which put him behind Russell. I wonder how tricky the Red Bull is in dirty air, because as Martin said, when Piastri got past, straight away losing significant lap time, then not able to make a move on Russell or, trying to hold the gap to Russell in that second stint. I think Max could have done better had Russell not emerged in front of him. I think in that final stint, I think it wouldn't have been the full amount of time from the McLarens. But to have that oversight of what's going on totally around him and be on top of his regulations is very impressive. What they'll be doing on the Red Bulls, they're probably looking at a speed overlay of the lap rather than the race trace. They're probably looking at to see from GPS, they can see a car's speed through every section of the track, every corner, to see if he dropped any time. Now, what Mercedes will have come back with is the proper car telemetry where it shows the brake and the accelerating, and you only need to show a very small lift in order for it to have been a lift. So it might even be something that doesn't necessarily show up as well in the GPS as you would like. Russell's also an excellent driver, so he knows he can do it, and sometimes he knows drivers know what they can get away with and what they can't get away with. So I think Russell will have been pretty sure, Mercedes will have been pretty sure from the data they have, which will be more than what Red Bull have for their own car in order to defend that. But it is impressive, the fight. And I'm always, when you see a driver taking in what's going on around him and giving out this very valuable information in the pit wall, that's astonishing.
Bernie, seeing you on my screen, did you see your movie stunt double was in the commentary box in Miami?
I did, yes.
Yeah, with
Is there a striking resemblance? Is there a resemblance? Are they exactly the same?
Massively so, yeah. Yeah, sorry, that was an aside. Where were we?
No, it's fine. What we all say is that that there was a new floor, obviously, for Max during this race. Yuki, we understand, will get it for Imola, so it didn't make too much of a difference, finishing 39 seconds behind. But just a two-pronged one to you, Martin, because actually we've discussed this on the podcast with Bernie and Ted over the last few weeks on the subject of the TD for Spain. How big a thing do we anticipate that being? McLaren have played it down and Ferrari have played it down with regards to the technical directive to do with the stiffness of the front wing. And the other thing is George on that very subject, in that he has said ultimately he has optimized every single week the race result. And even in a car which he was struggling with this weekend, he still managed to take a podium. Yes, he was lucky where Max was unlucky on the virtual safety car, but he's driving his socks off, isn't he?
He is. He had a stomach cramp as well, didn't he, at the end? George didn't make it to the press conference. So, he's driving beautifully. He hasn't got a contract for next year that we know about at the moment, which feels strange. Although when I speak to Mercedes about that, they remind me that they're not only are they his current employers, they're his management team as well. So George is driving beautifully and grabbing everything that's available. If they can find a 10.42 and close the gap to McLaren, he'll be right there. So what was the other question, Ty?
It was on the technical directive that we're going to get for Spain, and is that going to be actually what defines the championship? If McLaren stay this far ahead after that, are we thinking, okay, then we are into the inter-team battle?
I think it would be a non-event, personally. The teams know what they've got to do. And, we've had it in the past where suddenly, what was that link suspension that had to come off a Renault or something? And nothing changed. We cut the floors off in 1994, and that still didn't make any difference, hardly. It's, over the years, get rid of active. Oh, my goodness, it's going to be awful. Well, it's not awful, and so on and so forth. So I don't think I'm sure they're all merging towards what they need to do in Spain anyway. That'd be my view, but I don't know if you guys agree.
No, I mean, we've discussed the same, and we'll probably just have to wait and see, won't we? But let's move on to Williams, as I'm conscious of time, even though we could go on for a couple of hours on this one. 5th and 9th, Alex Albon 48 seconds behind, Carlos Sainz 60 seconds behind. He was pretty unhappy as well, got done after the virtual safety car and was out there, and the two Ferraris on fresh tyres came past him. Aaron Clifton asks, Carlos and Alex, good pairing or something more? Really good so far into the season, but questionable antics at the start for Albon. Bernie, what did you think of Williams' weekend?
Yeah, I think the car shows promise. Williams, I think for me, definitely from the beginning of the year, I sort of expected them to be a lot worse in the standings than they currently are, because I think everything that we've been told is they weren't going to focus anything on this year's car, put it all into next year's car. So I think Williams as a team is strong. I think that driver pairing should be strong. I think this week, a bit like we discussed Ferrari at the end of the race, juggling position at the start of the race is not the way to get your two cars around the track as fast as you possibly can. So either hold in position or not hold position. We obviously, there's selective radio calls go out that we hear. We don't hear everything and we don't know what was discussed in advance, but it definitely seemed misaligned, if we're to put it kindly, in terms of what the strategy was to get those two cars through that first into the race as quickly as possible. But the car's looking positive on the whole, so it's just about ironing those things out.
Yeah, Carlos was he apoplectic? Perhaps that's the wrong word, but he's pretty disgruntled afterwards and over team radio, wasn't he?
So let's just be clear about why this was. So I understand. I mean, Carlos outqualified Alex, didn't he? Carlos was 6th, Alex was 7th on the grid, and there was a point where they were running in that order, and then Alex got by.
He was I saw him at the airport. He was unhappy about the contact. He got some car damage as well, and clearly, yeah, some other stuff went on that into Williams and then, of course they were side by side for a lot of it, weren't they? At early stages, they were having a right old ding dong battle. But something, you're right, Carlos was very unhappy about something.
Because Albon was saying he wanted to stay in the clean air, wasn't he? Because the falling, didn't he have a falling water pressure or something like that? The car was starting to overheat.
Yeah, he might needed to have stayed in the clean air because he had a temperature issue, and he had to, in clean air, he had to sort that out. So maybe that will be Alex's defense as to why he couldn't give the place back for whatever reason and let Carlos ahead of him. But I don't know. I don't know whether Alex is. We all think is such a sort of lovely guy. He's got the knife between his teeth, just like anybody else out there. He's a pirate, just like all the other drivers. And maybe he was sort of inspired by the U.S. Navy Blue Angels. He's thinking, all right, Williams, you send me up there for a PR stunt. It is basically a PR stunt, and go up there in a FA-18 without a G suit on. Well, what do you think's going to happen if you haven't got a G suit on? He's a tall guy, 6'1". You can't send a guy who's 6'1" in a fighter plane at 7G without a G suit.
You think that made him angry in the race then?
Yeah, I think he was angry.
Did you see that the briefing before they went up there with those Blue Angels and the speed with which they did it? And asked Valsey in press whether he did the same before the race. It was unbelievable, wasn't it? The way they go through everything that they need to do, considering how close they are taking off and flying in close combat.
I know, it looked silly, but in fairness to the Blue Angels, they sing through their formation, which is also what the Red Arrows do. Yeah. They have a tone and intonation. It's going up and down and right, and they do that. The Red Arrows do that off display, as far as I imagine a lot of display teams do that, because when you get to the end of a dip or a song, or an intonation, then it lets you know when you're at the end of a turn and down there. So it didn't seem that silly to me.
Why don't we do this in our production meetings? We're talking about the program ahead. I think it would help us enormously.
We just got
yeah.
We tell that to Crofty, will we? We'll tell that to Crofty to.
But I mean, we do not need Crofty singing in production meetings.
We don't want him singing we do not want him singing. I mean, poor old Anthony, by the way, had an adjoining room with Crofty this weekend, and he had the stereo on full blast from about 6 a.m, wandering around. I can only imagine what he was wearing, singing with his brushing his teeth.
Not
into the loo. On Williams, just quickly before we finish with that, James was obviously really upset about what happened, that retrospective 5-second penalty when they finished under the safety car in the sprint, costing them 5 points there. That perhaps is something that needs to be looked at. Finishing 2 cars in the top 10 could have been even better for them this weekend, Bernie, couldn't it? So, yeah, a couple left on the shelf there, and Carlos crashed in the sprint. So, actually, a scruffy weekend could have been even better, but yet so many positives, as we've just discussed.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the 5-second penalty in the sprint, we can discuss whether that's correct or not, but that's unfortunate. It's unfortunate that that comes at the end of the sprint when there's a safety car in play and you lose a lot of positions. The same happened to Max Verstappen because of his penalty. So that's just the luck of the draw a bit. I don't think we can be too upset about that. Whether it happened during the sprint or after the sprint, they're not changing the result because of it. It's just come a little bit later. And yeah, I think that as Ted mentioned, in that the changing around of cars, I believe one car was told to hold position then as well. The Albon, okay, maybe you need a bit more free yard because your car is suffering whatever way, but he instantly closes up to the back of the Mercedes. So I don't think that's necessarily a good enough argument. Yes, he's not behind his teammate, but he's directly behind 2 other cars then again. So I think the traffic situation's pretty similar. So yeah, they've got a bit of review to do on that one, and hopefully they can tidy those little things up and come back a bit stronger for next week.
Williams have got the 3rd best driver pairing on the grid, and they're in contention. They're moving towards the front of the grid, and it's really impressive. And it's almost a nice problem for them to have the disappointment of the sprint, because a year or 2 back they'd have loved to have had the opportunity to have that problem. So overall they must be pretty happy at Williams. They're moving in contention.
Hang on, Brundle. You can't just hang on, Brundle. You can't throw that one in without explaining yourself. So you're saying Lando and Oscar number 1, Charles and Lewis number 2, and then Sainz. Is that what you're saying? And then Sainz and Albon?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Well, who else? Where do you see a better pairing than Sainz?
I just want to be clear. Just want to be clear. That's
all right, Kravitz.
Throw in the 3rd best without saying what your top 2 are. And plenty of people listen.
All right, I'm sorry. Apologies.
Most people disagree with everything you say on this, but that's a whole different podcast, Simon. Who are the best?
It is. We'll do a rankings podcast another time. But actually, when you look at Doralton, I talking to Alex and Carlos before the start of the season, and they did lay it out. I think Alex said, we're not going to win races before 2027. Well, they're on the right track here. It was laid out with a 5 to 7 year plan, wasn't it? And the owners are affording James the time that he needs to build in exactly the image that he wants. And he's taken over the learnings for the years underneath Toto. I remember speaking to him about that. When you think who he's worked underneath, he's worked under Dave Richards, he's worked under Toto too, and it feels like he's kind of learning leadership as he goes, but actually he's got all the hallmarks of being a very, very strong leader going forward. If we finish if we could, and we don't know, by the time this goes out, this could be completely wrong, but it looks like, as we mentioned at the top, there are some very strong suggestions that Jack Doohan might be replaced for Imola in that Alpine. 6 races, it does seem harsh, bearing in mind that he is part of the Alpine Young Driver Program. And this seems exactly as we thought at the start. Unfortunately, a driver that probably brings similar, but carries some cash. Flavio's much preferring him to the one that doesn't bring that amount of cash. So do we think that Franco Colapinto is going to be in for Imola? And do we also think that is extremely harsh on a young rookie who's just trying to find his feet in Formula One, albeit with a rather large crash bill already, Bernie?
Yeah, I think the crash bill is the standout there, isn't it? We're in a cost cap, and running off the pace a little bit is maybe okay. You can work around that, but racking up significant cost is very, really difficult for a team to manage under the current cost cap regulations. I think that 6 races is harsh. I think if any of us were given a job for 6 races, we'd feel a little bit hard done by, but it's not the harshest there's been this year by a long way. So it'll be interesting to see, and we'll only see the full reasoning for it going forward. If the change does happen and then Franco Colapinto is able to get in and able to get some more results without the same cost on it, then we'll be saying that it was the right decision. If it doesn't really change that much, then we'll be saying it was a bit harsh. So it's really hard to evaluate these drivers with the limited test days that we have properly against each other.
Yeah, there are contracts in place, and they'll be with the contract recognition board. I believe there's a clause a performance clause. But of course, Pierre Gasly hasn't had a lot of results either for various reasons, although he has had some. Now, is it about money? Has Colapinto really got this money? Colapinto dismantled a few Williams, didn't he, later on in his time at Williams, but showed a lot of potential. But I think in the end of the day, if a driver's, whatever their name, whatever their experience, if they're not performing well enough and they are doing a lot of damage to the car, whatever the contracts say, you and as I understand it, Flavio is actually part of Jack Doohan's management team as well, which is slightly, slightly clouding the issue as well. But if he's not able to get the job done, then they'll have to make a change, whoever it is. You kind of think give him till the summer break, as a rookie to find his feet and show what he can do, because he has shown flashes of speed and potential, Jack. But this is a brutal business, it is. It's not a finishing school. It's Formula One, so anything can happen, and it wouldn't surprise me if they don't make a change.
He's been doing okay, Doohan, because he's, as Martin says, flashes of speed. He hasn't scored any points, but technically he works with the engineers well. And crucially, in Miami, he set the car up correctly, so much so that Gasly went away from his setup, and then the car was nowhere, and then changed back to Doohan's setup for the Grand Prix, and so had to start from the pit lane. So, Jack has been really doing very well in all departments apart from scoring points. And that's the crucial thing. I think had he scored some points and maybe not had the accidents, then they would defer this Colapinto move until the summer. I don't know whether it's happening or not. All I can say are three things. First of all, pre-season, the rumor was that Jack had until Imola, didn't he, to make a big impression, that after Miami, a decision would be made. So that's the point we're at. Two, on Thursday, when the drivers appeared for their interviews, suddenly the whole Drive to Survive crew were at home with Alpine. And I thought to myself, that's a funny choice for a race like Miami. Why are they choosing Alpine out of nowhere for the Drive to Survive, the Netflix cameras, to be on both drivers all together? So, did the producers of Drive to Survive are not idiots. They know the rules. They know the rumors like everybody else that there might be a driver change after Miami. And also the program's called Drive to Survive, right? So it's all about, you have to drive well in order to survive, to keep your drive. So there's nothing Drive to Survive likes more than a driver change. And the third bit of completely circumstantial evidence I have for this is that after the race, so the Drive to Survive cameras were camped outside Alpine for the whole weekend. I even had a discussion with Adam with the 10-foot boom pole and their camera guy about how their weekend. They were outside Alpine the whole time. And after the race, I went into the Alpine motorhome to get a drink before my notebook, and I had to go past Mick Doohan and Jack Doohan standing at the doorway, looking, as to quote the great Martin Brundle, like they had root canal surgery on a Monday coming up. They both looked very upset. Now, that I thought was just to do with Jack's lap one exit. But I thought to be carrying that still with them a good hour after the checkered flag, and so publicly, was interesting. But listen, let's see. In the next few days, we'll know.
I did see the Netflix crew following him out, and that's usually, I hope it's not an ominous sign for Jack. But yeah, Bernie, you just feel so sorry for them, but you can't. As Martin said, it's Formula One. It's not a finishing school.
Yeah, exactly. It is a harsh environment. We all know that. We've all lived that. And I think teams, the development is so strong. And the points in the midfield to the back of the field are going to be crucial. Picking up points, particularly when you lose a driver for whatever reason. Let's say if Gasly retired early in the race, they need the second driver to be picking up the points. The setup stuff that Ted mentions is very interesting, though.
Yeah, actually, with the other rookies, four of the rookies DNFing, two actually because of engine failures, Bortoletto and Behrman, but Doohan and Lawson obviously coming together. So that didn't all go well for them. Word on Isaac Hadjar as well. He was unlucky because Yuki Tsunoda picked up a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane, and he just missed out on getting 10th. Another fine effort. He's definitely shown flashes of speed, and we all know about Kimi Antonelli. Final word to you, Martin, if we could, about grid walks. Could you just let our viewers or listeners understand the complexities of a US grid walk versus other ones? I mean, it's it's chaos, but I think you did well to get Jackie in there to have a word with Lisa, who seemed reluctant, but the lady with only one name, you got to use him more often. Maybe you should take JYS with you everywhere you go.
I think he's my only chance going forward, to be honest, is to send Jackie in as my wingman. Well, there's a long list of who's going to be there. I mean, last year in Miami, it was 60 odd, and in Vegas was 70 odd A-listers, influencers, movie stars, whatever. It's a shorter list this year, but then half the megas who were there weren't on the list. Your Chalamets and that's the thing anyway. And I spoke to Evander Holyfield on the grid, who wasn't on the list, and all sorts of people. It's just a mess, and there's so many people. I can't even find myself sometimes. I don't know which row of the grid I'm on half the time because I can't even see a racing car, let alone try to analyze each person walking past as whether they might be famous or not. In any event, a lot of fans think I shouldn't talk to any of them. I should only talk to the drivers or the teams. But I like to mix and match it a little bit and see if there's some interesting people. I don't know. It's just an unholy mess, the whole thing, and somehow it sort of works. Who else was I trying to find? John Bon Jovi, and I have all sorts of really funny lines, funny in my head anyway. I want to say to these people, and then you never spot them. They're not even on the grid half the time. And by the way, half of them are not even in the venue when it comes to it. And the list changed right up to the. I don't know. I'm a racing driver and a commentator. I'm not a stand-up comedian, I'm so far out of my comfort zone interrupting people. You have no idea how much I dislike doing that, but it's kind of got a life of its own now, hasn't it? So I've got to carry on, I guess.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're stuck doing this till the end of time. But it doesn't help when people like Timothy Chalamet turn up in racing bulls as a racing bulls mechanic in disguise, as Ted was saying. Yeah, it's difficult for you. Yeah. We empathise, we really do. That's about it.
You don't.
Thank you. We appreciate you joining us for the podcast that is called the F1 Show. That's not a podcast, but is. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. We will see you in Imola. Ted, Bernie, pleasure. Plans for the week? Anything good going on?
That's a good question. Get over some jet lag.
Look at that. They've got nothing to do.
And I know what I'm doing. I'm off to Bologna at the end of the weekend to spend a day and a half with Kimi Antonelli. I'm doing a shoot for Imola, a pre-shoot for Imola. That's what I'm doing.
Lovely.
So how me, old idiot me in my shorts, is going to relate to an 18-year-old Italian lad, I don't know. Sort of mad uncle. Mad uncle. Maybe I'll play that role.
Bertie, anything going on?
I don't think I've got anything exciting happening this week, but I might at Imola next week, so I'm looking forward to that. A bit of prep for Imola probably. It's quite boring.
Good. Well, we'll look forward to your notes because we live and breathe by them. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Bertie. Thanks, Ted. We'll see you next week. From us all here. Bye-bye.